Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide.
Hi, preschool peeps.
Hi, peeps.
Allison and I have been noting the information that's out in the world about why young children are not embracing reading.
Yeah.
And we've noticed it in a couple of things. There are articles in the world about why young children are not embracing reading. There's a documentary Allison recommended that I watched that I have not yet, but it talked about what's happening with reading. And as many of the articles point out, it's not what you think. It doesn't have to do with the amount of time that children spend on screens.
Right. I think a lot of people are blaming the screens, and it has not anything to do with that at all.
That's what they're finding.
Yeah.
That there are other reasons why children don't want to read, including things like they find reading to not be enjoyable. We're going to dig into these a little bit.
Yeah.
But they find reading to not be enjoyable. The readings, they think books don't interest them.
Right.
They don't see the purpose of reading. They don't understand the purpose of it. And what were some of the other things that you?
They don't like the topic.
Yeah, they're not
And
interested.
I also feel like it used to be where we would talk about books. Hey, what book are you reading? Oh, I'm reading this book or whatever. Now I feel like when children are talked to about books, it's not about the book or the topic. It's about how fast did you read it? How well did you read it?
Yeah,
how
but
well
we're
did you
talking about
comprehend
younger
it?
children. We're talking about younger
That's true.
children.
That's
They're
true. I'm
not
thinking
reading on their own.
kindergarten.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of even younger children.
Yeah.
We lay the foundation for a love of literacy when they're in the preschool years.
I think that the times that people are reading has an issue.
We don't always make reading enjoyable for children. Yeah. And if we're going to talk about what's going on in the preschool ages, that they're not growing up wanting to be readers.
Yeah.
I think that we have to admit that for too long, we've done things like used books as a transition from one activity to another.
Yeah.
And which makes it, from the children's point of view, a chore. Or a punishment.
Yeah.
You know, when children, let's say you're transitioning from one activity to another in an early childhood program, and the kids are they're kind of running around and there's chaos happening.
Yeah.
And an adult will look at them and go, okay, everybody, listen, we need to calm down. Everybody go look at a book. It has now a punishment.
It's a punishment. Yeah.
And a chore.
Yeah.
Right. I've seen people use that as every transition. Go look at a book. We're going to do this. Go look at a book. We're going to do that. Yeah. Children lose the purpose of reading through that. I think it's very important that we read to, I know it's very important that we read to children at home. Very often that's done at bedtime. Which is lovely if we're not in the middle of arguing about going to bed.
That's true. And I think it also makes it so the child thinks like, oh, that's what comes next. If I read a book, then it's bedtime. If I read a book, then at school, it might be nap time and I don't want it to be nap time. Like they start thinking like, if that's what I always do before I go to bed, then that must be a bedtime thing and not just an enjoyable thing.
I think if the children are struggling with bedtime, that maybe reading has to happen at a different time.
Yes.
And you still need a bedtime routine. You need a ritual for going to bed, but maybe we take the reading out of it because they're seeing that as, well, if we read a book, like you're saying, if we read a book, then it's gonna be lights out and I can't do anything fun anymore.
Yep.
Yeah.
That they're associating the book with something they don't want to do necessarily.
Right. So, perhaps we need to think about, is the bedtime reading really best for each and every child, or should it be done differently?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I know someone who used to read books with her child before they were going to have dinner because she felt like it calmed her child.
Yeah.
To be able to sit and eat well.
Yeah.
So you can really think about it. There are other times where this might actually develop a love of books rather than, we're going to read a book and that means the adults are going to go do something and I don't know what they're doing and I wish I knew and I want to go.
Yeah.
So yeah. And no books for transitions in early childhood programs, folks. You have to take it from their point of view. One of our responsibilities, if you're an early childhood educator or you're educating young children in any way, any setting, is to develop a love of literacy, and that does not do it.
Right.
You want to get the children involved in something during transition, sing a song with them, put on something they can dance to.
Yeah.
Right. Get them all together that way.
I feel like anytime you're forcing the books on them in that way, you're taking the joy out of it right there. Like if you're saying the only thing they're allowed to do during this transition is read a book and there's no other option, then you force them into it. And then if they choose not to, if they choose just to sit there and not read a book, are you saying, no, go get a book, whether they want to or not? You're forcing it. And then it's like, oh, they're going to, I don't know, if you're going to force something on me, I'm automatically going to put my hand out and be like, nope, not doing it. Even if it's something I want to do. Right. So then they learn, like, I'm going to resist this activity because she's making me do it. And I don't want to be made to do anything.
You know, one of the most interesting to me reasons that they've realized is happening is that children don't understand the purpose of books. And there's something that I always say before starting a read aloud with young children and I say it because I want them to understand why we use books. So when you're introducing a book, and by the way, our introductions over time have been terrible, but if you're introducing a book, you should give the child a little synopsis of the plot, a little summary of what's going to happen in the book, and then pose a question and say something like, let's read and find out. I always say, let's read and find out before I read to children, because I need them to know that we read to find out things, whether it's what's going to happen in a fictional book or a fact in a nonfiction book. Why do we read? We read to find out. Right. So I think it's very important that we think about, how are we introducing books? Am I giving them a synopsis of the plot and posing a question? Or am I doing something else? Because something else isn't going to interest them. I
have seen classrooms where they just sit down and read the book and they don't introduce it at all. They're like, okay, we're going to read this book now. And they don't talk about it beforehand and they don't talk about it after. And then it's like, once they've read it, it's like, close it up. Okay, we're done. Check. We did that today. And there's no talking about it, because to me, you should talk about it before and after.
And during.
And there are some people who told me that, like, if they talk about it during, they get marked down on certain assessments. And I'm like, no, I think you should be. And I was like, that's wrong. Like, what's the point of reading if I can't stop and say, what do you think's going to happen next? You know, like, what do you think's going on here? Look at this person, like, look at this character. What do you think they're feeling right now? You know, like, what's the point then? But I feel like if you've made it into this dry activity of like droning on page after page without discussion throughout the whole event, then what is the point? You've made there be no point in it. It's just check, we're done. Okay, we did the book today.
And if the book is one that you know you've read 1,000 times with this child, you don't need to give them a synopsis. Then what you should be doing is saying, do you remember what this book is about?
Yep.
Because recall is one of the cornerstones of future reading comprehension. So you should look and say, do you remember what this, before we read it, tell me what it's about, and then read it.
And I feel like I have books that are always in my library, no matter what, because they're books that I know that the children, they know them by heart now, but nothing gets them more excited to read that book than now knowing what it's about.
Right.
Because they can turn the pages and they're like, oh, I know what's happening. You know, it makes them be like, I'm reading, you know, even though they might not be reading it, they know it. And so like, they get them excited for it. So like, if you're not having like, I guess, a core amount of books that are always in there that they can learn, then that's a disservice too. If you're like, and I'm saying like, I switch my library out a lot based on themes or what we're learning about or what they're interested in, but I always have a group of books in there that are always there, always. And they're the ones that they like and they know, so they could pick it up and be like, oh, you know, it gets them excited. You know, like what, I don't know what you're doing if you're not doing that.
And if they're excited about reading it, it's really good if you can to go over and let them read it to you.
Even
though they're not really reading in the preschool ages, they've memorized it.
They've memorized it. That's like one of the first steps.
I think, and I don't know if this was anything you looked at about this topic, but I think that it's very important that children see adults reading materials, or they don't think it's an adult priority.
Right.
So a lot of people have the devices that they read on, but also children need to see you pick up something like a magazine or a book,
something,
physically sit with it, so they understand, oh, adults do this too. It's not just a kiddie thing.
Right. And I think like when I grew up, my mom, who still to this day is a very avid reader, she read in front of us. She would be reading her adult books, but she was reading in front of us. And she does not have a day in her life that she doesn't read. I now, as an adult, don't have a day in my life I don't read either, but I think it's because my mom modeled that for me from a very young age, that this is what we do. That's what she did. She read, and she would tell us, I'm reading because I really like it. I really enjoy it. She never said, I'm reading because I have to do this for a paper or I have to do this for work. It was like, no, I just enjoy reading. It relaxes me. And that's what she would do. And she goes, I enjoy finding out what the characters are going to do. Like, my mom was good about talking about that kind of stuff, and I grew up with this sense of a joy of reading, which I now send down to the children I teach, but not everybody has that. So like, I don't know where you draw from if you don't have that in you, but like,
I think there are plenty of adults who don't find reading joyful themselves.
yes. So
but that doesn't mean I can't make a read aloud joyful for children, hopefully.
Right.
Because we want as many of them as possible to develop a love of reading because they're going to have to do so much reading in their educational years, especially.
Yeah.
Right. One of my children is not a reader.
Okay.
He's not a reader.
Yeah.
Scott is not. But now he'll tell me things about what he's reading because he finally got to an age where it interested, like he could find things as an adult that interest him.
Yeah.
And he'll say something to me like, all through school, I didn't enjoy reading, but now I sometimes enjoy reading.
But I think in school, you're told what you can read and what you can't read.
Yeah.
And then when you're an adult, you're like, oh, wait, there's a book about this subject that I really, really like, and I could read that, And I think that's part of some of the issue, especially with like maybe older kids, is like the books that they're given to learn how to read are not topics that they're interested in. So go to the library and get them books that they're interested in, because then they'll want to read them.
Well, that's another thing. I don't know if the same number of children are visiting places like libraries and bookstores, which I remember getting my first library card.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I was so proud. You go and you get them a library card, and this is like such a grown-up thing.
Yeah.
And then periodically you go and have them borrow books, teach them what it is to borrow a book, to take it's so exciting for young children. But I don't know how many people are still doing this because of the availability of other means of getting books.
But the library is a wonderful place.
So is a bookstore. I know people get books from Amazon. I know.
No, but there's something
Barnes and Noble
about going into the bookstore. The people who own the bookstore, the librarians in your library, they have a wealth of knowledge. Like if you are interested in a topic and you go into either one of those places and say, hey, I'm really into aerospace engineering as an adult, they will point you in the right direction and find it. If you as a child are interested in baseball, then you can go in there and be like, oh, here's some great books for you to read about baseball. Like any topic, they know, boom, they know all the authors, they know everything.
Isn't it true that there's something, I don't know, calming and magical about going into either a library or bookstore? And you can go to the library, public libraries are free.
Yeah.
Make sure you get your child a library card because and then always I remember this as a child. I remember we were always going to the library, taking books back and taking out other books.
Yes.
And I got to pick. Pick which books I wanted.
I got to choose them.
I was so proud of this pile of books that we would check out.
Yeah.
Maybe part of the problem is that children aren't having those experiences as much any longer, going to places like the library and the physical bookstore, because they're so easily accessed online.
That's true.
So you can have a house full of books that were purchased online and the children didn't get the experience of going and looking.
There's special about the library, the bookstore. It's like when you get it on Amazon, like that's like your child say, hey, I want a book about, baseball or whatever. And you as the parent go on, but they're not, when you go to the library, you can, it's magic. There's 20 books about the topic you want, and you get to peruse through all of them and be like, I want this one, or I want all of them, and you can, and there's no like ownership, I guess, when you just buy it on Amazon. That's like your parent then has to go on there and buy it. Right. Yeah. There's no, like, I don't get to flip through the pages and be like, oh, is this one that I want? Like it's different.
I also love those plastic covers they have on the book in the library.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes when it's a hardcover.
It's a hardcover. Yes.
There's something just so cool about it. I've said, like someday when I retire and maybe I'm looking for something part-time to do, I'm like, I would love to work in a library.
I would love it.
Just a part-time little library job.
Yes. I would love that. And there's so many things at the library that you don't even know exist. Like if you have a library card, you can get passes to museums and stuff like that.
Yeah,
too.
that's
like,
true.
It's amazing. Like what you can, so like and it's free. It's all free in your town. So like, you may as well just take advantage of it.
So if you have not already, take your children to the library. Is it still true that they have to be able to write their name to get a library card?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
You know what happened when I was a kid? How I got my library card was in second grade. They took us, every single second grade class went on a field trip to the library.
Oh, how fun.
And
You
I
got
don't think
your
they do.
cards?
Yeah. And then we got our cards. And I don't think they do that anymore.
What a shame.
I know, because it was like, it at least introduced children to the library that maybe wouldn't have been introduced to it otherwise.
I also used to, when I directed a program, I used to set up a lending library for the children. We had a cart.
Yes, I love that.
Right. We
Yeah.
had a cart where we had books that we didn't need, books that families donated, whatever it was. And we used to bring that cart once a week to the classes, and children could borrow books. They would get so excited, but I'm going to warn you about this. They often borrowed books that they had at home. Families would complain to me all the time. Don't let my child borrow this book. We have it at home. And I would say to them, no, I'm not going to restrict them.
Yeah.
This is something that the children get to choose, and it makes them excited about reading it. So even if you have it at home and they borrow it, read the one they borrowed. Yeah. Just do it, because it excites them about literacy and literature. Yeah. You know, I think we have to start to think about, am I making reading a chore or a punishment? Am I doing it at a time where the child is upset or out of sorts in any way? Am I doing it to stop chaos? Because that's not a reason really to do it. Am I making it joyful? Am I reading with joy? Are we discussing plots and stories and characters?
Are we discussing these books?
Right.
Because even after you've read it, I in my class will refer back to a book all the time. Be like, oh, remember that book?
Yeah.
That's situation, right? Always, because then they realize like, oh, that's an important thing she just read us.
Right.
You know, like sometimes weeks will go by, like, remember that? And they're like, I do remember that. Like, yeah, it's important. It's something you can remember, something you can use as a tool.
Exactly. You know, are we modeling a love of literacy? And if you're not a book reader, so pick up a magazine or something.
It doesn't have to be a book.
Right?
Yeah.
I would say newspaper, but so much of the news is bad news. We need a good news newspaper. So pick up some kind of magazine, just so the children see you physically reading paper.
Because when you're on the iPad, say, or a Kindle or whatever those like screen devices are that have it, you're still reading a book, and I get it. You're like, yeah, I'm still reading, but all they see is you on the screen.
Right.
For all they know, you're playing a game or reading your email. Like, and they might not associate that with a love of reading. Whereas if they see you open up a book or open up a magazine, then maybe they will.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we hope we gave you some things to think about, because we do want to raise a generation of children who embrace reading, because reading is such an important part of our lives.
Yeah.
And it starts in preschool, not even elementary school. Yeah. It starts in preschool. It starts from birth, frankly.
I think it starts from birth.
Yeah. Starts from birth. Okay, preschool peeps. Next episode is our 300th episode. I can't even believe it. We always wondered, how many topics will we have? Apparently,
we know how to talk.
300. Apparently 300
topics.
So please be sure to check us out next week, when we're going to have, I think, a special episode that we hope you will enjoy. Okay. See you on our 300th episode.
Thanks.